My family paid my professor to fail me, so I'd quit college. I found their emails in his office. I exposed them at graduation. Their faces, when I got my diploma, were golden. Look, I'm gonna tell you a story that sounds straight out of some twisted family drama movie, but I swear on my grandmother's apple pie recipe this actually happened to me. Picture this. You're busting your behind in college, pulling all-nighters fueled by nothing but Red Bull and pure determination, thinking your family's got your back. Then boom, you find out they've been actively sabotaging you the whole time. I'm 22, just trying to make it through my English literature degree at a decent state school about 3 hours from home. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, you know? My parents had been weird about the whole college thing from day one. While my older brother got the full cheerleader treatment for his business degree, I kept hearing how maybe college wasn't really my thing, how I should consider coming home and helping with the family restaurant instead. But here's the kicker. I was actually crushing it academically. Well, mostly. My grades were solid across the board except for one class that was driving me absolutely nuts. Contemporary American literature with Professor Hartman. This dude had it out for me, I swear. No matter what I turned in, I'd get these mediocre grades that made zero sense. My roommate Sarah would read my papers and be like, "Girl, this is A-level work. What's this professor smoking?" But every time I'd march into his office hours, Hartman would give me this condescending smile and explain how my analysis lacked depth or my arguments weren't sophisticated enough. Meanwhile, I'm watching classmates turn in work that honestly wasn't as strong as mine, and they're pulling B+s like it's nothing. The whole situation was eating at me. I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I really wasn't cut out for this. Maybe mom and dad were right when they kept dropping hints about how the restaurant business was steady work, how college graduates were a dime a dozen these days. But something in my gut told me to keep pushing. Update. So I've been getting tons of messages asking how I even got into his office to find the emails. Trust me, it wasn't some Ocean's 11 heist situation, but what I found there changed everything. Should I have confronted him immediately or played it smart? What would you have done? The breakthrough came during finals week of my junior year. I was stressed beyond belief, running on maybe 4 hours of sleep total, when I realized I'd left my copy of The Great Gatsby in Hartman's classroom after our last review session. The building was supposed to be locked, but maintenance had propped open the side door while they worked on the heating system. I figured I'd just slip in, grab my book, and get out. Hartman's office door was cracked open. Probably forgot to lock it in his rush to get home. I wasn't planning to snoop, honest, I just needed my book. But as I'm scanning his desk for it, I notice his laptop is still open with his email pulled up. And there it is, bold as day in his inbox. Repayment for grade adjustment services, final installment. My heart literally stopped. The sender? My dad's email address. I'm standing there like a deer in headlights, but my hands are already moving, screenshotting everything on my phone. The email chain goes back months. My parents had been paying Professor Hartman $2,000 total to tank my literature grades, $2,000 to make me fail. The messages were all businesslike and cold. Dad talking about how they needed their daughter to see reason about her unrealistic academic pursuits. Hartman responding with grade reports and updates on my progress, aka how well he was crushing my dreams. Mom chiming in occasionally with comments about how I'd be so much happier back home. I screenshot everything. The payment confirmations through Venmo, the detailed discussions about which assignments to grade harshly, even a message where Hartman suggests ways to make me doubt my abilities in class discussions. They had turned my education into some sick transaction. Sitting in that empty classroom, everything clicked into place. All those family dinners where they'd casually mention how my brother was doing so well with his practical degree while I was just reading books all day. How they'd compare me to my cousin who dropped out and was supposedly so happy working at her dad's auto shop. The way they'd get this weird, satisfied look whenever I complained about Hartman's class. They weren't just unsupportive, they were actively sabotaging me. I spent the next 2 hours in that office documenting everything. Email after email of my parents coordinating with this professor to destroy my confidence and force me to quit school. The worst part? Some of the messages showed they were planning to ramp up the sabotage if I didn't crack soon. They were discussing getting other professors involved. But you know what? Finding those emails was like finding a smoking gun. All that self-doubt, all those nights wondering if I was actually stupid. It wasn't me. It was them. I grabbed my Gatsby book and got out of there, but not before forwarding all those emails to my personal account. I had evidence now. Cold, hard proof that my family had bought and paid for my academic failure. Update, y'all are asking if I confronted my parents right away. Honestly, I was tempted to call them screaming at 2 a.m., but I knew I had to be smart about this. The real question is, would you go nuclear immediately or play the long game? Because what I did next was pretty calculated, and I'm not sure if it makes me brilliant or completely savage. Instead of flying off the handle, I channeled all that rage into strategy. First thing I did was make copies of everything, save the screenshots to 3 different cloud accounts, printed hard copies, even emailed them to Sarah as backup. Then I marched straight to the dean of students first thing Monday morning. Dean Martinez listened to my whole story without interrupting, her expression getting more serious with each screenshot I showed her. When I finished, she just sat there, for a minute, shaking her head. "This is academic fraud on multiple levels," she said finally, "both from Professor Hartman and," she paused, looking uncomfortable, "from your parents' end as well." She explained that they'd have to investigate, but given the evidence, I'd likely be able to retake any assignments that had been unfairly graded. More importantly, she offered to let me record a conversation with Hartman to see if he'd admit to what he'd done. So we set it up. I walked into his office the next day with a recording app running on my phone, asking innocent questions about my grades and what I could do to improve. Within 10 minutes, this guy was practically bragging about how he'd been helping my family by showing me that literature wasn't my strong suit. Sometimes students need a reality check, he said, leaning back in his chair like he was doing me some huge favor. Your parents just want what's best for you. They see that you're struggling here and think you'd be happier in a more practical field. I kept my cool, asked a few more leading questions, and got him to basically confess to the whole scheme on tape. He even mentioned the payments, talking about how my parents were grateful enough to compensate him for the extra attention he was giving my case. Walking out of that office, I felt like I was floating. I had him dead to rights. Dean Martinez moved fast once she heard the recording. Hartman was suspended pending a full investigation, and I was assigned a new professor to reevaluate all my work from his class. Turns out, when graded fairly, my papers were consistently earning A's and B pluses. Imagine that, but I wasn't done. Not even close. I spent the next few weeks playing it cool with my family, acting like nothing had changed. They kept dropping their little hints about how maybe I should consider coming home after the semester, how the restaurant could really use my help. I just smiled and nodded, all while planning something that would make their little scheme look like child's play. See? Our graduation ceremony was going to be huge, not just for our school, but it was a joint ceremony with 2 other colleges in the area. We're talking hundreds of graduates, thousands of family members, local news coverage, the whole 9 yards. And guess who had volunteered to help with the tech setup for the event? Yeah, that would be me. Turns out all those hours I'd spent working with the campus IT department as a student job were about to pay off in ways I never imagined. Update. Okay, so people are losing their minds asking what I did at graduation. Some of you have guessed pretty close to the truth, but trust me, the reality was even more dramatic than anything you're imagining. The question is, was I justified in going full nuclear option in front of everyone, or should I have handled this privately? Because what happened next is still talked about at that school. Graduation day arrived and my parents were there in the front row beaming like proud peacocks. Mom had even bought a new dress for the occasion, some fancy floral number that probably cost more than most people's textbooks. Dad was working the crowd, shaking hands with other parents, playing up the whole so proud of our college graduate routine. If only they knew what was coming. I'd coordinated everything with Dean Martinez. She knew what I was planning and had given it her blessing, especially after the investigation confirmed everything and Hartman had been officially terminated. Sometimes, she told me, accountability needs to be public. My moment came when they called my name to receive my diploma. I walked across that stage, shook hands with the dean, and took my place at the podium for the traditional graduate remarks. This was supposed to be where I'd say a few words about my college experience and thank my family for their support. Instead, I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. Before I say anything else, I announced to the crowd, I want to share something that I think perfectly represents the importance of integrity in education. And then I played the recording of Professor Hartman confessing to taking bribes from my parents to sabotage my grades. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop in that auditorium. Then the whispers started, growing louder, as people processed what they'd just heard, but I wasn't finished. I also want to thank Dean Martinez and the college administration for helping me uncover this scheme and ensuring that my education was evaluated fairly. I held up my diploma. This degree represents not just my academic achievement, but my refusal to let anyone, even family, sabotage my dreams. The crowd erupted. Some people were cheering, others were gasping, and I could see phones coming out as people started recording. In the front row, my parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Mom was pale as a ghost, and Dad was doing this weird thing where he kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish. They tried to get up and leave, but they were trapped in the middle of the row, and honestly, everyone was staring at them now. The local news crew that had been there for routine graduation coverage was suddenly very interested in our little family drama. I finished my speech by thanking the professors who had actually supported me, my friends who'd believed in me, and Dean Martinez for ensuring justice was served. To anyone out there facing similar challenges, I said, looking directly at my parents, don't let anyone convince you that your dreams are too big or that you're not smart enough. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones holding you back. The applause was thunderous. Students, faculty, and families were on their feet cheering. Even some of the other graduates were crying. Apparently, my story had struck a chord with people who'd faced their own family pressures about college. As I walked off that stage, diploma in hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. Free, you know, like I'd finally cut the strings that had been controlling me. My parents managed to escape during the chaos that followed, but not before half the audience had seen their faces on the big screen when the camera panned to them during my speech. The local news ended up running the story that night. Local student exposes family academic fraud at graduation ceremony. It went viral on social media within hours. The aftermath was swift and brutal for everyone involved except me. Professor Hartman not only lost his job but faced criminal charges for accepting bribes. The state education board launched an investigation into whether he'd done this with other students. Turns out my family wasn't his only client. The guy had been running a side business destroying students' academic careers for cash. My parents, oh man, they tried everything to fix things. Text messages, voicemails, emails. They even showed up at my apartment a few days after graduation. Dad was all apologetic, talking about how they just wanted what was best for me, how they were worried about my future in such a competitive field. Mom tried the emotional manipulation route, crying about how I'd embarrassed the family, how everyone in town was talking about them. We just wanted you to be practical, she kept saying. The restaurant business is steady. You could have had security. But here's the thing. I was done. Completely done. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, trying to make them proud, and they'd literally paid someone to make me fail. There's no coming back from that level of betrayal. I blocked their numbers, blocked them on social media, and started making plans to move as far away from that toxic situation as possible. My diploma wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was my ticket to freedom. The extended family drama was its own soap opera. My aunts and uncles heard about what happened and were horrified. My grandmother, Dad's mom, called him personally to tell him he'd lost his mind. You don't sabotage your own child's education, she told him, and I heard this secondhand from my cousin. What kind of parent does that? My brother tried to play mediator for a while, calling me to explain how Mom and Dad were just scared for my future. But when I asked him if he'd known about their little scheme, his silence told me everything I needed to know. He might not have been actively involved, but he'd known something was up and never warned me, so I cut him off too. 3 months after graduation, I packed everything I owned into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove to Boston. I'd landed an entry-level position at a small publishing house. Nothing glamorous, but it was in my field, and it was mine. No family connections, no strings attached. Just me, my degree, and my determination to build something real. The first few months were rough. I was living in a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that was definitely not the fancy part of town, eating ramen more nights than I care to admit. But you know what? I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy for the first time in years. I started taking creative writing classes at night, made friends with my coworkers, and began building the life I'd always wanted. It wasn't the life my parents had planned for me, but it was authentic. It was mine. The best part? I started a blog about my experience, not just the graduation drama, but the whole journey of breaking free from family expectations and pursuing your actual dreams. It resonated with people. I started getting messages from other students who were facing similar pressures, from parents who realized they'd been pushing their kids in the wrong direction, even from professors who'd witnessed academic manipulation. The blog grew into freelance writing opportunities, which led to better positions at work, which led to more confidence and more success. Everything my parents had tried to prevent by sabotaging my education was happening anyway, just without their involvement or approval. About a year after I moved to Boston, I got a message from my grandmother. She'd seen my blog and wanted me to know how proud she was of me. Your parents made a terrible mistake, she wrote, but you turned it into something beautiful. That takes real